This video is going to cover both the information in Lesson 10.6, the quadratic formula and the discriminant, as well as Lesson 10.7, solve quadratic equations with the quadratic formula. So it'll be one video for both days, so each day you can just focus on the part that you need. When we are looking at any type of quadratic equation, and that means an equation whose highest exponent is an x squared term, we want to look at it in the context of standard form. That's this right here, where we have the coefficient in front of the x squared represented as a, the coefficient in front of the x represented as b, and the leftover plane coefficient represented as c. We put this together, and it's written in your textbook. I'm not going to go over it here because you're not going to need to create the quadratic formula on your own, but we can use completing the square to bring this formula together that looks like this. This is the quadratic formula, and we can use it with any quadratic equation in standard form to solve for x. And what we're going to focus on first is this part right here, the square root of b squared minus 4ac. This part is called the discriminant, and discriminant is spelled discriminant like this. And in the discriminants, that's where you're going to be able to tell if your equation has two solutions, one solution, or no solutions. And you can tell based on the properties of square roots. If what's inside the square root is a positive number, you have two roots, or two answers. If what's inside the square root is 0, you have one root, or one answer. Lastly, if what's inside the square root is negative, you have 0 roots, or no solution. And that's because you can't take the square root of a negative number. There is no number that you can multiply times itself to get negative. So before you even solve the problem, you'll be able to look at the discriminants to decide how many answers you're going to get. Something as a bonus, if your answer is positive, you'll be able to tell immediately if you'll be able to simplify the square root or not. If what's inside the square root is a perfect square, your solution will be rational, and if it's not a perfect square, your solution will be irrational. We're going to start here. Find the discriminant and describe the number and type of roots. In order to do that, we need A, we need B, and we need C. The discriminant is this right here, b squared minus 4ac, inside the square root. B squared minus 4ac. So we're going to take our numbers and put them into this formula. We're going to do 3, because that's b, 3 squared, minus 4 times a is 2, times c is 7. Now, before we do that, I just realized that I made a mistake, and I don't want you guys to make this mistake. This is not 3, this is negative 3. And this is not 7, this is negative 7. We want to make sure when we're doing this that we are keeping the signs intact with where they belong. So if you like to write stuff as adding negatives to do that, that's a great idea. So now we can go through and figure out what's going to be inside the square root. The first part is negative 3 squared. That is negative 3 times negative 3, which is a positive 9. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times negative 7 is negative 56. That means that's 9 plus 56, or 65 inside the square root. Since the number inside the square root is positive, we have 2 roots, or 2 solutions. 65 is not a perfect square, so our solution is going to be irrational. Let's try that for this example. This example is a little bit different because when we start, we want to begin by moving this negative 5 over to the other side. Because for an equation to be in standard form, we want it to equal 0. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And I'm going to get x squared minus 3x plus 5 equals 0. Now it's much easier to see what our A, B, and C are. This one's a little bit different in the sense that we don't see immediately what A is. There's nothing here. But does that mean there's nothing? No. It means there's a secret 1. 1 times x squared is x squared. So we want 1 squared minus 4 times, we don't want 1 squared because 1 is A, and we don't want A, we want B. So we want negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. I should just bite the bullet and start singing right now so I don't make more mistakes, but I'll spare you for now. When we start doing this, negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. That's the same as last time. 4 times 1 is 4. And 4 times 5 is 20. So we have 9 minus 20, or negative 11. Since we have a negative inside the square root, we have 0 roots, or no solution. That's extremely helpful because if we know immediately that we have no solution, we won't have to go through the entire quadratic formula. This is where we're going to start on lesson 10.7, so if you're only looking at 10.6, you can stop now. 10.7 is using the entire quadratic formula in order to solve quadratic equations. Let's see if I can just delete that. Wonderful. This is the entire quadratic formula, which you should memorize because it will be very helpful when you are solving these types of equations. You will continue to use this in your other algebra studies, including Algebra 2 and beyond. In this type of equation, you'll see that x is on this side. That's what we're solving for. We are solving for x. And we'll be able to do it in one shot by putting everything on this side. Negative b plus or minus, I forgot the minus, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So we want to do one that has solutions. So we're going to look at this equation, not this one. This one has no solutions, and so you would stop here when you figured out that there is no solution. But here, we can use this and we can solve this quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. So we need A, B, and C in order to do this. A is 2, B is negative 3, C is negative 7. So x equals, we write that negative sign because it comes with the formula. negative b is negative 3, or the opposite of negative 3. Sometimes, when people memorize the quadratic formula, they say x equals the opposite of b. And that's an accurate way to say it because that's what you're going to be doing, taking the opposite of whatever b is. Plus or minus gets copied. B squared is negative 3 squared minus 4 times a times c. A is 2, c is negative 7. So we have 2, negative 7, and the whole thing is over 2 times a, which in this case is 2. And now we're going to start to solve. The opposite of negative 3 is a positive 3. So the opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. We already did that right here. So inside our square root, we're going to get 65. And this is going to be over 4. From here, we want to make sure that our answer is in simplest radical form. That means that we don't want to be able to pull any perfect squares out of 65. The perfect squares that we're looking for are things like 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and 64. And if we look at 65, 65 is not divisible by any of those numbers. So it is already in the simplest form possible. We're going to write our answer then. It's going to look weird. It's 3 plus or minus the square root of 65 divided by 4. That's what x equals. Now, you may be saying, wait a second. We're supposed to get 2 roots. How come our answer only has one thing? Well, your answer is right here. This plus or minus. What that means is one of your answers is 3 plus the square root of 65 over 4, and your other answer is 3 minus the square root of 65 over 4. We can write that together as one using this plus or minus symbol.